My name is Reyes Calder, and I was never supposed to be anywhere near the ninth brood. I was reserve handler at the Vantage Coliseum, third string, the one who mucks the holding pens before sunrise, so the sponsored competitors don't have to look at what their beasts leave behind. Reserve handlers don't get assigned to class threats. We get assigned to feed schedules and water lines, but 2 nights before the Ledger Games opened, the handler rostered for the Chorvan brood collapsed with brood fever, and someone had to walk the feed line past a swarm every station on the circuit had stamped Unbondable in red ink, and I was standing closest to the clipboard. The Vantage Coliseum runs on paperwork the way a body runs on blood. Every beast on the circuit has a ledger entry, and that entry decides what a handler is allowed to feel about the thing on the other side of the gate. Fear, mostly. Fear ensures cheap. I'd spent 2 seasons reading those entries the way you'd read a weather report before a shift. Aggressive, work from the restraint pole. Territorial, feed from outside the enclosure. Unbondable, class threat. Do not enter without armed escort. Nobody official ever stayed long enough after the ink dried to see whether the animal underneath the classification agreed with it. The Chorvan are chitin from the joints out. Amber black, built low and wide with 6 clawed limbs and mandibles that click when they're deciding whether you're worth the effort of killing. A brood moves like one animal wearing 40 bodies. Registrar Corlin Vey had logged them personally after the last games, when a sponsor's handler lost 2 fingers reaching in to adjust a feed trough. His entry read, in full, 9th brood, unbondable, class threat. Recommend culling post-tournament, pending sponsor review. I read it standing outside the pen with a bucket of processed meal in my hand, and then I went in anyway, because the meal wasn't going to pour itself. The brood didn't rush me. They didn't do anything a threat report would have predicted. They went still, all of them at once, the way a room goes still when someone important walks in, and the queen, the sovereign, the largest of them, easily my height at the shoulder, with a crest of bone plate running the length of her spine and eyes like wet glass, turned her head and looked at me the way you'd look at something you'd been waiting on without knowing it. I poured the meal. She watched me do it. Mandibles ticking softly, a sound I'd later learn wasn't threat display at all, but something closer to a held breath. I told her, not because I thought she understood language, but because the silence needed filling. Easy. I'm not here to hurt anybody, just the food. She lowered her head and ate 3 feet from my boots. By the second night, the rest of the brood had stopped scattering to the far wall when I came through the gate. By the third, the queen was resting the weight of her foreclaws against my shin, while I worked the rest of the line, patient as a dog waiting for a walk, and the smaller ones had started arranging themselves along my path, in a loose, shifting corridor, 40 bodies parting and closing again as I moved, like water letting a stone through. I never told anyone, not because I thought it was dangerous to say out loud, but because I'd seen what happened to handlers who reported anomalies. Reassignment, paperwork, someone else's name on the roster by morning, and for the first time in 2 seasons, I didn't want to be reassigned from anything. I didn't report it. Reserve handlers who report anomalies get reassigned before they can finish the sentence, and I liked this assignment better than mucking stalls. What I didn't know, what I only learned after, was that Registrar Vey needed the 9th brood to stay exactly as dangerous as his report said. A cull draws a sponsor payout. A tame brood draws nothing but paperwork. He had a debt riding on that culling fee, and a swarm quietly choosing a reserve handler was a problem he intended to solve before the closing ceremony. He solved it during the exhibition bout, in front of 11,000 seats and every camera drone the station owned. The rival team's striker, a broad-shouldered man named Hask, fighting under a sponsor patch I never bothered to learn, was supposed to draw the 9th brood into a scripted show of aggression against a padded target, while I stood clear at the rail. That was the plan on paper. What actually happened was that Hask's practice blade slipped during the approach and opened a line across my forearm, deep enough that I felt the cold before the pain, and he was already stepping back into position, already turning to the cameras, already shaping his face into the shocked expression of a man about to watch an animal do something terrible on schedule. The queen didn't lunge at him. That's the part the crowd wasn't ready for. She came to me first, crossed the sand in 3 strides, and put her whole armored weight against my side, folding low, mandibles pressed shut, the exact posture I'd seen her use in the pen when she wanted to be touched rather than to touch. 11,000 people watched a class threat press itself against a bleeding handler like a cat, asking to be let in from the rain, and the arena went so quiet I could hear my own blood on the sand. Then the rest of the brood moved. Not at me, around me, past me, 40 bodies flowing in one current toward Hask, and I understood in that half-second why the report called them unbondable rather than merely dangerous. The word had never meant they couldn't love something. It had meant that once they did, nothing built by committee was going to stop what came next. I said the only thing I had, the same words I'd used in the pen, because I didn't have better ones. Easy, easy, that's enough. And they stopped. Every one of them, 3 body lengths from Hask, close enough that he'd already fallen to his knees and wet himself in front of every sponsor on the circuit. But not one claw had touched him. They held that line because I asked them to, not because a handler's collar or a shock baton told them to. That was the difference the report never had a column for. Registrar Vey reached the rail white-faced, already reaching for language to salvage the broadcast, already opening his mouth to call it a containment failure. I was still holding my own arm shut with 2 fingers, and I looked at him and said, "Pull up the entry, read it to them." He didn't want to. Security wanted him to, because 11,000 witnesses and 40 cameras don't forget an unbondable kill swarm choosing to guard a bleeding reserve handler instead of finishing the kill they were owed. And a man who wrote class threat on that footage was a man about to be asked very pointed questions about a culling fee. He read the entry off his own slate, voice thin, in front of the crowd he'd built it for. Unbondable, class threat, recommend culling. The Queen chose that exact moment to lay her head across my knees, patient as furniture, while blood from my arm dripped onto amber chitin she didn't so much as flinch from. Nobody in that arena needed the rest of the sentence explained to them. Vey stood there holding a slate full of a lie the whole station had just watched be disproven in real time, and there is no dignified way to stand like that. He didn't try, he just stopped talking and let the silence finish the job for him. They didn't cull the 9th brood. The sponsors who'd wanted their payout got a different headline instead. 40 cameras had already sold it for them, and Registrar Vey got reassigned to a station nobody's heard of since, his name quietly removed from every ledger he'd ever countersigned. Hask never fought another exhibition bout on the circuit. Word travels faster than a striker's reputation can outrun it, and nobody wants to book a man the footage remembers better than he'd like. The handlers started calling what the brood did that day the silent ledger correction, not because anyone official ever admitted the record was wrong, but because 40 predators had corrected it themselves, without raising a claw against the man who'd lied about them and left the truth standing exactly where the paperwork used to be. It wasn't a doctrine, it wasn't even a decision, not the way we'd understand one. It was just what happened when something real finally stood next to something written down, and the written thing lost. I still muck stalls before sunrise. I still don't report anomalies. And most mornings, when I walk the feed line, the Queen is already waiting at the gate, crest low, patient, 3 feet of armored killer content, to follow a reserve handler with a bucket of meal, because somewhere in whatever passes for a Chorvan heart, she'd already decided the ledger was never the thing that mattered.